Wait until you see how crazy this concert was. It all started because in 1987, Billy Joel was given a special invitation to perform in the Soviet Union, but what followed didn't quite go to plan, and this nice guy caused mayhem for Soviet audiences. After decades of tension between the US and the Soviet Union, an agreement was made at the 1985 Geneva Summit to encourage a cultural artistic exchange between the two states. Part of this involved inviting American musicians to perform in the Soviet Union, something which was unheard of, in fact at one time banned. Soviet citizens were familiar with some Western music through bootleg recordings, but their idea of the concert experience was wildly different. Elton John gave a rare performance back in 1979, but there's something really eerie about the way they react to the music. Meanwhile, American audiences were used to something very different. So when Billy Joel was invited to perform, it was not only an invitation for his music, but also the American concert experience. Other musicians were approached, such as Stevie Wonder and Bruce Springsteen, but Billy Joel was likely chosen as he was seen as this safe first attempt to see how things go. His music wasn't political or controversial, and he had a string of hits and classic songs that would make up a great stadium concert experience. For Billy, performing in the Soviet Union also came with some risk. He brought a team of 130 people, his bands, camera operators, sound engineers, financing the tour himself, spending over $2 million with likely no prospect of making any profit. Along with a series of concerts, they'd also make a concert film, a live album, and a documentary, showcasing this immense diplomatic effort to exchange cultures between these two warring states.
People forget. It was still a Cold War. They were still the enemy. They were the evil empire.
A series of 6 concerts over 2 weeks were planned in the summer of 1987. 3 concerts in Moscow, followed by 3 concerts in Leningrad. Both venues were large indoor arenas capable of holding around 20,000 people. Tickets were made available at modest prices as part of the effort to encourage citizens to embrace this music, as well as part of the show being broadcast on state TV, and an entire show being broadcast on state radio. Everything started out well. Billy was warmly invited, formed a great connection with the people he met, and so with everything going smoothly, he began his series of concerts. And this is where things started getting difficult. The first show in Moscow began pretty badly. The audience sat quietly in their seats, made even more awkward by the officials who sat in the front row, stone-faced and dead still. In fact, at one point, these Soviet officials left partway through the show out of boredom.
Thought I was going right down the tubes. I thought, okay, well.
So yeah, maybe it was just going to be like the Elton John concert. An audience totally bored with the music, except this time it was even worse because they'd made all this effort to showcase these American concerts. With everything going downhill, Billy needed to find a way to turn things around and started changing things on the spot.
What's next?
But if you look at the setlist from this first show, there are so many ballads. In fact, it's basically Billy Joel Ballads Evening. They're beautiful songs, but they're also some of his slowest and calmest songs. If he wasn't giving them any energy, how could he expect any energy back from them? What he noticed was that people way back in the distance, in the back rows, way back from any officials, they were really trying to enjoy the music. So maybe it wasn't that they didn't know how to enjoy the music, they just didn't feel like they had permission. And now the officials had left, it could have been possible for those at the front row to enjoy the music as well.
And I think what happened was there was a change in the audience. Some people left because it was too loud. And we do have a loud show. And their tickets were taken by kids outside.
With just 2 songs left, Billy decided to go into the audience and started engaging with those at the back and bringing them down to the front. And then suddenly the whole crowd felt like they had this permission to enjoy the music.
I'm going to jump into the audience, which is one of those things. I said, I'm going to jump. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just going to jump.
Billy and the band came back out for an encore which is almost as long as the main set. But look at the difference. Billy started playing all his more upbeat songs. It took an entire show, but Billy had almost single-handedly given Soviet audiences permission to act like audiences did in the US. In the space of a few hours, he'd become the first person to bring this music and this experience to Soviet audiences.
Yeah, I think we overestimated their need to see ballads.
They might have needed that though.
This was just the first show, but it seemed that Billy had started to get the idea. If he gave them all this energy and gave them permission to engage with the music, they would give their energy back. This second show was the one that was going to be recorded for the concert film and live album, and this is the one where things get really crazy. Well, things started out pretty well. Billy changed the setlist around slightly to give more energy to the earlier songs in the set, but when his own team started filming the audience and putting the lights on them, they started sitting back down and acting more cautiously, knowing they were being filmed and could be identified by officials.
I'm gonna take control, get a hold of my emotion. Stop lighting the audience! Why does it always seem to hit me in the middle of the night? Stop it! Told me there's a number I can always dial. Let me do my show, for Christ's sake!
Billy got furious as his own team started ruining the show. All this effort that he'd made to engage with the audience was being ruined by his own team of filmmakers.
And I came all the way here. I don't want our own people ruining the show.
News reached back home in the US of what happened. The New York Times ran an article, Billy Joel has a tantrum, and TV stations reported on the incident, making it out to be some crazy event.
Joel got ticked off when his American film crew turned spotlights on the crowd to capture their reaction to his performance. When interviewed, Joel passed off the onstage incident as just part of the show.
I didn't throw a tantrum, I threw a piano.
Tomorrow night he sets his hair on fire.
So great. Billy was sent over there as a nice, safe, diplomatic musician representing the US, and he'd let things get way out of control, trashing his instruments and shouting at the crew. So much for building good relations. But what about the Soviet audiences? Well, they loved it. They all thought it was part of the act, and a reporter in Moscow apparently had fans coming up to him asking if he would do the same thing in the next show, because they were attending that and wanted to see it. The remaining 4 shows continue with the crowd showing even more energy with each performance. The series of concerts had gone from what Billy described as an oil painting into his craziest run of concerts ever, and definitely the craziest concerts the USSR had ever seen.
Some of the guards thought that people needed sedatives. They were going so crazy. Something was really happening when we saw the security guys rocking and rolling. The guys in the uniforms who were supposed to be the crowd control were actually out of control.
There was this soldier right down front. I remember pointing to his hat. And then all of a sudden he gave me the hat. And you could see he was terrified for his life. And I took the hat, put it on my head, and pranced around. And I was going to give it to him. And he actually went like, "No, for you."
The impact of these concerts was greater than anyone had ever expected. In the following years, Western music became a much larger part of Soviet culture. In 1989, the Moscow Music Peace Festival included bands such as Bon Jovi and Motley Crue, and 2 years later, Metallica and AC/DC organised a free concert to over 1 million people in Moscow. And ultimately, it led to the end of the Cold War. I don't think you could say these concerts directly led to the end of the war, but the impact of sharing this music and understanding that it's this universal language was so powerful to both sides. But there's one more little victory that came from all of this. For Billy, these concerts were also a moment of great importance, and he said these were the best concerts he ever did. When he was younger, he remembers the story of American pianist Van Cliburn. Van Cliburn won the first Tchaikovsky piano competition in Russia in 1958. This competition was organized specifically to demonstrate Soviet superiority during the Cold War. But the American Van Cliburn won the competition because they loved his playing so much. This acceptance of the music between the two cultures was an inspiration to Billy, and he wanted to do the same with his music. And he certainly did with these concerts.